Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awaken power of Future Sight Haki and get married with Vinsmoke Reiju? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Eye of the Maelstrom. The world was ending in fire and thunder. Dust, blood, and the acrid smell of ozone choked the air. For Naruto Uzumaki, the fourth great ninja war had devolved into a singular, desperate struggle against a ghost who had become a god. Madara Uchiha, reborn and empowered with the Sage of Six Paths, chakra, moved with the unholy grace of a fallen deity. Every gesture carved canyons into the ravaged earth. Every word was a decree of despair. Naruto, battered and breathing in ragged gasps, was a flickering candle against a hurricane. Kurama's chakra, a familiar inferno within him, was roaring. But it was like throwing logs into a furnace that was already melting down. He could feel his own energy reserves scraping bottom. His sage mode senses, usually a symphony of life and energy, were screaming with the discordant noise of 1,000 souls crying out and then falling silent. He and Sasuke had been fighting in tandem, a blur of gold and violet, the sun and moon personified, pushing Madara back inch by bloody inch. But Madara was relentless. He adapted, he evolved, he countered every move with a strategy centuries in the making. A moment of separation was all it took. Sasuke was thrown aside by a wave of invisible force, a Limbo clone's brutal shove, sending him tumbling across the battlefield. That left Naruto alone, standing before the white-haired specter of death. "You have fought well, child of the prophecy," Madara said, his voice deceptively calm. He floated a few feet above the cracked ground, his Rinnegan eyes swirling with cosmic power. A black truth-seeking orb, no bigger than a fist, hovered beside his palm. It was a sphere of pure annihilation, capable of turning anything it touched to dust. "But this is where your tale ends. The world of dreams I am creating will have no place for your stubborn, foolish hope." Naruto gritted his teeth, forcing his exhausted limbs to obey. He formed a Rasenshuriken, the spinning blade of wind chakra screaming like a banshee. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing gambit. He poured the last dregs of his power into it, the golden light of the sage's power making it shine like a miniature sun. "This street, Ori isn't over until the last page is written," Naruto roared, launching himself forward. Madara merely smiled. "Then allow me to write the epilogue." He didn't move. He didn't need to. The truth-seeking orb shot forward. Not with blinding speed, but with an unnerving, inevitable certainty. It was a period at the end of a sentence, a final, absolute conclusion. Naruto's senses, honed by years of life or death combat, screamed that he couldn't dodge it. It wasn't just fast. Its trajectory was perfect, calculated to intercept him at the precise moment he was most committed to his own attack, with no way to pivot or retreat. This was it, the end. In that sliver of a second, as oblivion rushed to meet him, Naruto's mind didn't flash with memories of his life. It was filled with a single, overwhelming regret. "I'm letting them all down." And then, something shattered. It wasn't the sound of the Rasenshuriken dissipating or the earth breaking. It was something inside his mind, a pane of glass, that had separated him from the true flow of the world. Time didn't slow down. It fractured. He saw it. Madara's lips curl into a smirk. The truth-seeking orb leaves his side. Its path is a black line drawn through the air, aimed not at his chest, but slightly to his left, anticipating his desperate attempt to swerve. The orb will connect with his shoulder, disintegrating his arm, his torso, and his head in less than a heartbeat. The vision was not a thought or a prediction. It was a memory of something that hadn't happened yet. It slammed into his consciousness with the force of a physical blow. He didn't have time to process it, to understand the impossible nature of what he was seeing. There was only instinct. Without a conscious command from his brain, his body moved. He didn't swerve, left as his instincts had screamed he should. Instead, he cancelled his forward momentum with a burst of chakra from his feet, a move so abrupt and jarring it felt like his bones would snap. He dropped, tucking his body into a tight ball, letting his own Rasenshuriken sail harmlessly over Madara's head. The black orb of nothingness sliced through the space where his shoulder had been a fraction of a second before. The air itself seemed to turn to ash in its wake. Naruto landed on the ground, rolling into a crouch, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. His mind was reeling. A wave of vertigo and nausea washed over him. The world seemed to stutter, to flicker at the edges. Across the cratered no man's land, Madara's placid, godlike expression was gone, replaced by a flicker of genuine, unfiltered shock. His eyes, which held the knowledge of ages, narrowed. That should have been a killing blow. There was no way the boy could have known the orb's true trajectory. It was a feint within a feint, a move designed to punish the most skilled sensor. To dodge it was not a matter of speed, but of precognition. What was that? Madara's voice was a low growl, stripped of its earlier condescension. Naruto didn't answer. He couldn't. His head was pounding, a new sense screaming for attention, a torrent of information flooding his brain. It was a chaotic, overwhelming stream of could be and will be. Madara will strike from above. A whip of lightning from his staff. Dodge right. No, he feints. The real attack is a limbo clone from the left flank. Block. Don't dodge. A meteor is being pulled from orbit. Sasuke will intercept. I need to attack his primary body while he's distracted. The visions were disjointed, chaotic, overlapping. They were possibilities, branching paths of the immediate future, all assaulting him at once. It was a cacophony, and he felt like he was drowning in it. Madara didn't wait for an answer. He moved, a blur of white and black, the sage's staff in his hand crackling with dark lightning. He brought it down in a devastating arc, aiming to split Naruto in two. The vision screamed, dodge right. But another, clearer premonition sliced through the noise. It's a trap. The staff is a distraction. The limbo clone is already behind you, its hand aimed for your heart. This time, Naruto trusted the impossible. He ignored the descending staff entirely. As the lightning-wreathed weapon seared the air next to his face, he spun on his heel, his arm already moving. He threw a chakra-infused punch into the empty space behind him. His fist connected with something solid. There was a sickening crunch of bone. The air rippled, and the invisible form of Madara's limbo clone materialized, a ghostly afterimage, its face contorted in shock as Naruto's fist buried itself in its chest. The clone dissipated like smoke. Naruto used the momentum of his punch to pivot away just as the real Madara's staff crashed into the ground, gouging a deep trench where he had been standing. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. On the far side of the battlefield, Sasuke pushed himself to his feet, his Rinnegan wide with disbelief. He had seen it too. Naruto hadn't reacted to Madara's attack. He had moved to counter the limbo clone before Madara had even completed his primary strike. It was impossible. Madara pulled his staff from the earth, his expression now one of cold, analytical fury. You can see them, he stated, a sliver of ice in his tone. You can see my limbo. I can see more than that, Naruto breathed, his own voice sounding distant to his ears. The chaotic flood of futures was beginning to stabilize, his mind slowly, painfully, learning to navigate the storm. He could feel it now, a new power humming alongside his chakra. A sense that was not of the body but of the soul. He could feel Madara's intent, the very shape of his will, and he could see the actions that would spawn a split second before they occurred. He pushed himself to his feet. His body still aching with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with a new, terrifying clarity. He looked at Madara not as a ninja, but as a collection of possible futures. He saw the path Madara would take, the jutsu he would form, the words he would speak. It's over, Madara, Naruto said, and for the first time in this fight, he believed it. Arrogant child, Madara roared, his rage finally breaking through his divine composure. You have stumbled upon some new trick, but it will not save you from destiny. He launched forward, a whirlwind of deadly grace. He threw orbs, swung his staff, unleashed waves of soul-crushing energy. But it was like trying to catch smoke. Naruto was no longer just reacting. He was moving in concert with the future. He would sidestep an attack that hadn't been launched. He would raise a block to meet a blow that hadn't been thrown. He weaved through a storm of certain death as if he were taking a casual stroll, his movements economical, precise, and utterly flawless. He wasn't just dodging. He was making Madara miss. He was positioning himself in the exact spot where Madara's attack wouldn't be, forcing the Uchiha to overextend, to waste energy, to fall out of rhythm. The god was being led in a dance by a mortal who could hear the music before it was played. With every failed attack, Madara's frustration grew into a cold, seething fury. This wasn't skill, it wasn't speed, it was a complete and utter violation of the rules of combat. Naruto saw his opening, a perfect, shining thread in the tapestry of fate. Madara will gather his remaining truth-seeking orbs to form a defensive shield, but in his rage, he will leave a 0.7-second gap as he recalls the one nearest to Sasuke. It was his only chance. He gathered all his remaining strength, the Nine Tails chakra and his own sage power flaring to life one last time. He molded it into a single, perfect Rasengan, a spinning sphere of pure, concentrated power. As the vision predicted, Madara's orbs flew towards him, forming a protective cage. But for a fleeting moment, there was a gap. Naruto surged forward, not with the explosive speed of before, but with a fluid, inevitable motion. As if he were part of the current of time itself. He thrust the Rasengan into the gap. The impact was cataclysmic. The raw power of the Sage of Six Paths, concentrated into a single point, met the divine energy of Madara Uchiha. The collision didn't just create an explosion. It tore at the very fabric of the world. A blinding light erupted, swallowing the battlefield, swallowing the sky. It was a fusion of golden hope and divine ambition, an energy that this dimension was not built to contain. The air screamed, and space itself began to rip apart like wet paper. A swirling vortex of impossible colors, a maelstrom of gold and violet, opened behind Naruto. It was a wound in reality, pulling at him with immense gravitational force. Naruto felt his consciousness fraying. The strain of using his newfound precognition, combined with the final, desperate attack, had pushed him far beyond his limits. He saw a final, terrifying vision, the vortex swallowing him whole, pulling him away from his world. Away from his friends, away from everything he had fought to protect. He tried to fight it, to anchor himself, but his strength was gone. The last thing he saw was Sasuke's horrified face, reaching out for him as the dimensional rift pulled him into its unknowable depths. Then, everything went black. The sea was angry. Waves the size of small mountains crashed against the hull of the Germa 66. Their steel-plated sides groaning in protest. Rain fell in thick, horizontal sheets, driven by a wind that howled like a tortured beast. For the Grand Line, it was a respectable storm. But there was something else in the air, something unnatural that made the hairs on Vinsmoke Reiju's arms stand on end. She stood alone on an observation deck, her pink hair a vibrant plash of color against the monochrome gray of the storm. Her suit, a marvel of Germa science, protected her from the elements, but it couldn't shield her from the strange, disquieting feeling that permeated the atmosphere. It was a subtle pressure, a hum of energy that felt utterly alien. Her brothers would be inside, likely bored or bickering. Ichiji, with his explosive arrogance. Niji, with his electric temper. Yanji, with his brutish simplicity. They wouldn't notice this. They only understood power they could see and measure. This was something different, something other. Princess Reiju, you should come inside. A soldier clad in Germa's insect-like armor called out, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind. The storm is worsening. Reiju raised a hand in acknowledgement but didn't move. Her gaze was fixed on the churning, bruised purple clouds above. The pressure was growing stronger, centering on a point directly over their ship. The air began to crackle, and a faint, golden light bled through the clouds. Suddenly, the storm's roar was eclipsed by a sound that tore through the sky, a high-pitched, grinding shriek, like reality itself was being ripped open. Reiju's eyes wide, Ned as the clouds were violently torn asunder. A vortex of swirling energy, a chaotic blend of brilliant gold and deep violet, materialized in the heavens. It was not a weather phenomenon. It was a wound in the sky. Alarms blared across the massive ship kingdom. Soldiers scrambled on the decks below, their disciplined formations breaking for a moment in the face of such an impossible sight. What in the hell is that? She heard Niji's voice shout from a nearby doorway. He and her other two brothers, Ichiji and Yanji, had emerged, their own raid suits shimmering. An unknown energy phenomenon, Ichiji stated, his red-clad form unmoving as he analyzed the vortex with cold detachment. Potential weapon. Looks like it's collapsing. Yanji grunted, clenching his fists. He was right. The vortex pulsed violently, then constricted. With a final, deafening boom that shook the entire vessel, it spat something out. A dark shape, trailing golden light, fell from the sky, tumbling end over end like a discarded doll. It plummeted towards the ship. It crashed onto the main deck with a deafening clang of metal on metal, the impact denting the thick steel plating. For a moment, there was only the sound of the storm and the hiss of steam from the impact site. Reiju was the first to move. Her boots made no sound as she leapt from the observation platform, landing gracefully on the deck a few feet from the crater. Her brothers followed, their movements more aggressive, more militaristic. In the center of the warped steel lay a boy. He looked to be in his late teens, clad in bizarre orange and black clothing that was torn and scorched. His hair was a startling shade of sun yellow, and even unconscious, his face was set in a look of fierce determination. A strange, spiral symbol was zoned on the back of his tattered jacket. But what drew Reiju's attention was the energy radiating from him. It was faint, exhausted, but it felt like a slumbering volcano. It was the same golden energy she had seen in the sky. What a mess, Neji scoffed, prodding the boy with the toe of his boot. Is he even alive? His injuries are severe, Reiju said, kneeling beside the stranger. Her analytical gaze swept over him. She saw deep lacerations, severe burns, and signs of massive internal trauma. Yet, as she watched, she saw the edges of a particularly nasty gash on his arm begin to knit together, a faint golden steam rising from the wound. But he's healing, astonishingly fast. A test subject, then, Ichiji said, his tone devoid of emotion. He fell from that anomaly. His physiology could be a priceless asset to Germa. Yanji, secure him. Take him to the labs. Yanji grinned, a brutish, simple expression. Right, let's see what makes him tick. He reached down with his massive, mechanically enhanced hand. Wait. Reiju's voice was quiet but carried an authority that made Yanji pause. She placed her hand on the boy's forehead, gently brushing his spiky hair aside. He was feverish. His breathing was shallow. She felt a profound sense of exhaustion coming from him, a weariness that went bone deep. She had seen it before in soldiers pushed past their limits, but this was different. This was the exhaustion of a soul. For a fleeting moment, her carefully constructed Vinsmoke detachment wavered. She saw not an asset, not a weapon, but a person who had been through an unimaginable ordeal. His energy is dangerously unstable, she said, her voice cool and clinical once more, masking her momentary lapse. Treating him like a common prisoner or a lab rat could trigger a catastrophic reaction. We have no idea what he is capable of. A brute force approach is illogical. Are you questioning my orders, Reiju? Ichiji's voice was sharp. I am advising a more strategic course of action, she countered smoothly. Rising to her feet to face her brothers. He is a unique biological specimen. To understand his potential, we must first ensure his survival and stability. I will pay. Rs only oversee his recovery in the medical bay. My knowledge of toxins and cellular regeneration will allow me to study him without risking an uncontrolled energy release. Once he is stable and we understand the nature of his abilities, Father can decide how to best utilize him. She was playing their game, using their language. Asset, utilize, strategic. It was the only way to make them listen. The truth, that a strange, protective instinct had flared to life within her, was a weakness she could never reveal. Neji snorted. Since when do you care about the well-being of our toys? Since A2. Y demonstrated the potential to level this entire ship if handled improperly, she replied without missing a beat. This requires finesse, Neji. Something you have in short supply. Before her brother could retort, a new voice echoed across the deck, amplified by speakers. Reiju is correct. Their father, Vinsmoke Judge, appeared on a large monitor overlooking the deck. His imposing, masked visage looked down on them. His expression unreadable. His power is an unknown variable. Proceed with caution. Reiju, you are in charge of him for now. Determine the source of his power. I want a full report on my desk in 24 hours. Do not disappoint me. The screen went blank. Ichiji shot Reiju a look of cold annoyance before turning away. Fine. He's your responsibility. If he explodes, I'll hold you personally accountable. He and the other two brothers stalked off, their interest already waning now that immediate violence was off the table. Reiju let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had won, for now. She turned back to the unconscious boy and gestured to a squad of medical soldiers who had been waiting nervously nearby. Prepare a private room in the main medical bay. Full diagnostic suite, but no restraints unless absolutely necessary. Bring him. As the soldiers carefully loaded Naruto onto a stretcher, Reiju watched, a thoughtful frown on her face. As they lifted him, his hand slipped off the edge, and she instinctively reached out to steady it. The moment her gloved fingers touched his skin, her world exploded. It wasn't a vision in her mind. It was a raw, sensory overload. She felt a searing heat, saw a flash of 9, swirling red tails. The image of a monstrous fox with teeth like mountains, roaring with apocalyptic fury, burned itself onto the inside of her eyelids. She felt a surge of indescribable rage, followed by a profound, soul-crushing loneliness. Then, the image shifted. A man with crimson eyes, tears of blood streaming down his face as he stood over a fallen comrade. A desperate, hopeless battle against a pale, horned goddess. The torrent of images and emotions lasted only a second, but it left her staggering backward, gasping for air. Her heart pounded in her chest. The soldiers stared at her in confusion. She stared at the boy on the stretcher, her composure completely shattered for the first time in years. What was he? Who was he? Her decision, born of a fleeting, inexplicable spark of empathy, had just become something far more dangerous. She had not just brought a stranger onto her family's ship. She had invited a maelstrom into their midst. And she had a terrifying feeling that she was standing at its very center. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Echoes of a Broken World. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a violent system reboot. The first thing Naruto registered was noise. Not the familiar sounds of Konoha. The chatter of the marketplace, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant thud of training posts being struck, but a deep, rhythmic, metallic hum. It was a monotonous, all-encompassing thrum that vibrated through the very marrow of his bones. The second sensation was pain. A dull, throbbing ache settled deep in his muscles. A testament to a battle that felt both a lifetime ago and a mere second past. He remembered a blinding light, a tearing sensation, the horrified face of his best friend. The rest was a void. He forced his eyelids open. They felt impossibly heavy, caked with grit. The world swam into focus, a blur of sterile white. He was lying on a surface that was too soft to be a battlefield and too hard to be his bed. A thin, gray blanket was draped over him. He tried to sit up, and a wave of dizziness and nausea slammed into him with the force of a chidori. His head pounded, not with a simple headache, but with a chaotic, disorienting static. It was the new sense, the power he had awakened in those final, desperate moments. It was running rampant, untamed. Without an immediate threat to focus it. It was feeding him a torrent of useless information. He could feel the rhythmic pulse of the machinery around him, the faint, overlapping heartbeats of people moving beyond the walls. The subtle shift in air pressure as a door opened somewhere down a long corridor. He could see faint, ghostly afterimages of the immediate future, a drop of condensation tracing a path down a pipe in the ceiling. A flicker of the overhead light that would happen in 3, 2, 1, flicker. It was maddening. He was drowning in a sea of sensory input. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to focus, to find his center. He reached for Kurama. The familiar, vast space within his mind where the great fox resided was quiet. The inferno was still there, but it was a bed of embers, not a raging bonfire. Kurama was there, but he was deep in slumber, recovering from their catastrophic expenditure of power. I'm on my own, Naruto realized. A soft, clicking sound cut through the hum. A door sliding open. Naruto's eyes snapped open, his body tensing, every muscle coiling despite the pain. A woman stood in the doorway. She was tall and slender, encased in a form-fitting white uniform accented with a swirling, 66. Her hair was the most striking thing about her, a vibrant, impossible shade of pink, styled in a way that covered her right eye. The visible eye was a cool, calculating blue. She moved with a liquid grace that spoke of years of training, her expression a carefully constructed mask of clinical detachment. Naruto's new sense flared. It wasn't a clear vision, but a chaotic impression, a feeling. He felt her curiosity, sharp and analytical as a scalpel. Beneath it, buried deep, was a flicker of something else. Apprehension. No, it was closer to a memory of shock. "You're awake," she said. Her voice was as cool and smooth as her movements. "I was beginning to wonder if you would remain in a comatose state indefinitely." That would have made dissection problematic. Naruto didn't answer. He simply watched her, his senses on high alert. He catalogued every detail. The slight tension in her shoulders, the way her gaze swept over him, not as a person, but as a puzzle to be solved. He saw a flash, a brief premonition. Her hand will move to the datapad on the tray beside his bed. She walked further into the room, her boots making no sound on the metallic floor. A tray of medical instruments floated silently beside her. As the vision predicted, she reached for the sleek, glass-like datapad. "I am Vinsmoke Reiju," she stated, her eyes on the screen, which displayed his fluctuating vital signs. "You are aboard the flagship of the Germa Kingdom. Considering the manner of your arrival, you can imagine we have a great many questions for you." Germa Kingdom. The name meant nothing to him. He pushed himself into a sitting position, ignoring the protest of his muscles and the renewed wave of vertigo. He needed to be on equal footing, not lying down like an invalid. The static in his head receded slightly as he focused on her, the immediate and tangible threat. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice rough. It was the first time he'd spoken since the fight. "I just told you. The Germa Kingdom," Reiju replied, her tone laced with a faint hint of impatience. "A mobile nation, currently located in the Grand Line. Though I suspect that information is meaningless to you." She finally looked up from her datapad, her blue eye fixing on him. "A more pertinent question is, what are you? Your cellular regeneration is unlike anything I have ever encountered. You sustained injuries that would kill a normal man 10 times over, yet you are almost fully healed in less than a day. The energy signature you emit is off any known scale." She was interrogating him, not with threats, but with cold, hard facts. She was trying to categorize him, to put him in a box she could understand. He could feel the analytical intent rolling off her in waves. Naruto swung his legs over the side of the bed. He was still weak, but the embers of Kurama's chakra were providing a slow, steady trickle of energy. "I'm a ninja from Konoha," he said, his voice firm. He needed to project strength, even if he felt like he was about to fall apart. Reiju raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Ninja, a quaint term. Assassins, then. Protectors," he corrected, his voice sharp. "We protect our home, our people." "A noble sentiment," she said, though her tone suggested she found it naive. "And this, Konoha, of yours, is it responsible for the spatial anomaly that brought you here? Was it a weapons test gone wrong?" Naruto's mind raced. Spatial anomaly. She was talking about the vortex. They didn't know what it was. That was good. Information was a weapon, and right now, he was unarmed. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, settling on a simple, straightforward lie. His precognitive sense flickered again. "The medical droid hovering by the door will extend a syringe. Its target is my neck. A sedative." He didn't even glance at it. He kept his eyes locked on Reiju. "I was fighting a war. To protect everyone. The last thing I remember is a flash of light. Then waking up here." Reiju studied him, her expression unreadable. She clearly didn't believe him entirely, but she couldn't prove he was lying. "How convenient." She made a subtle gesture with her hand. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the small, spherical droid float silently forward, a needle extending from its metallic chassis. It was fast, almost silent, designed for subduing a patient before they could react. Naruto didn't move until the very last second. Just as the needle was about to touch his skin, he leaned his head to the side, his movement fluid and unhurried. The needle hissed past his ear, injecting a stream of clear liquid into the empty air. Simultaneously, his hand shot out and plucked a scalpel from the floating tray beside Reiju. It was all one smooth, economical motion. The droid froze, its programming clearly not equipped for a target who could anticipate its actions. Reiju's eyes widened, her mask of composure finally cracking. It wasn't the speed of the action that shocked her. Her brothers were faster. It was the certainty. He hadn't reacted to the droid. He had moved to where the droid would be, as if he had seen it happen 1,000 times before. Naruto held the scalpel loosely in his hand, not aiming it at her, but simply holding it. A silent statement. I am not helpless. I don't like needles, he said, his voice dangerously calm. Before Reiju could respond, the door to the medical bay slid open with a violent hiss, slamming into the wall. Enough of your games, sister. A loud, grating voice boomed. Father wants answers, not your slow, methodical nonsense. Two figures strode into the room, their presence immediately filling it with an aura of arrogant power. One was a giant of a man with green hair styled into a prominent curl, his chin guard emblazoned with the number 4. He had a brutish, leering grin on his face. The other was sleeker, his blue hair styled similarly, a cold, cruel smirk playing on his lips. His raid suit was a vibrant blue, and sparks of electricity crackled around his fists. They were Niji and Yanji. Niji. Yanji, Reiju said, her voice tight with annoyance. She turned to face them, her body subtly positioning itself between them and Naruto. I am handling this. His condition is still unstable. He looks fine to me, Niji sneered, his eyes crackling with blue lightning. Maybe he just needs some proper motivation. A little electricity can do wonders for jogging the memory. Yeah, Yanji grinned, cracking his massive knuckles. Let me have a go. I bet I can make him sing. Naruto felt a surge of alarm, quickly suppressed. The static in his head sharpened, the chaotic noise coalescing into a clear and present danger. His new sense screamed at him, showing him a dozen different ways this could go wrong. A dozen different attacks before they were even launched. Niji will fire a bolt of lightning at my chest. Yanji will charge, aiming for a gut punch to pin me to the wall. They are fast, faster than I am in this state. This is a medical bay, not a training hall, Reiju said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Stand down. Or what, Reiju? Niji laughed, taking a step forward. You'll poison us. You know that doesn't work on us. He was right. Her poison was useless against her modified brothers. But it was the only threat she had. Enough talk, Yanji grunted, and charged. He was incredibly fast, a green blur crossing the room in a heartbeat. At the same time, Niji's hand lit up, a blinding flash of blue energy erupting towards Naruto. It was a perfectly coordinated attack, designed to overwhelm and crush an opponent instantly. For a normal person, it would have been inescapable. But Naruto wasn't just reacting. He already knew it was coming. He dropped the scalpel, as Yanji's massive fist, wreathed in green energy, aimed for his stomach. Naruto didn't dodge backward or to the side. He dropped, falling to the floor as if his legs had given out. Yanji's punch sailed over his head, the force of it cracking the wall behind the bed. At the same instant, Niji's lightning bolt screamed through the space where Naruto's chest had been, striking the shattered wall in X. Plodding in a shower of sparks and plaster, Naruto used the momentum of his fall to roll forward, coming up on one knee between the two brothers. He had dodged both attacks without taking a single step. The room was silent for a split second, the only sound the crackle of residual electricity. Yanji and Niji stared at the empty space where their target should have been, their faces a mixture of confusion and fury. What the? Yanji started to say. He's fast. Niji growled, already turning, his fists crackling with renewed energy. They weren't just fast. They were monsters. Their bodies were genetically engineered for combat. But their movements, for all their speed, were predictable. They telegraphed their intent, their raw killing instinct, a fraction of a second before they moved. For Naruto's new sight, it was like they were moving through molasses. He saw the next attack coming. A spinning kick from Yanji and a sweeping electrical blast from Niji, timed to catch him in a pincer. He didn't try to counter. He was too weak for that. A direct confrontation would be suicide. So he danced. He pushed off his back foot, sliding on the smooth floor, letting Yanji's kick whistle past his nose. He ducked under Niji's blast, the heat of it searing the air above his head. He was a leaf on the wind, always moving to the empty space, the eye of the storm. He wasn't out fighting them, he was out thinking them in a way they couldn't possibly comprehend. Stand still, you rat! Yanji roared in frustration, smashing his fist into the floor where Naruto had been a moment before, cracking the metal plates. He's toying with us, Niji snarled, his attacks becoming wilder, less controlled. He unleashed a volley of electrical blasts, filling the room with blinding light and the smell of ozone. Naruto weaved through the barrage, his movements becoming more fluid, more confident. He was starting to get the hang of it, this future sight. It was like a voice whispering in his ear, telling him exactly where to be and when to be there. For the first time since waking up, he felt a flicker of his old self. Reiju watched, her one visible eye wide with utter disbelief. She knew her brothers. Their speed was legendary. Their coordinated attacks were unstoppable. Yet this boy, this stranger who was supposedly injured and weak, was evading them without even seeming to try. He wasn't just dodging. He was embarrassing them. "That's enough," she finally shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. A subtle, purple aura began to emanate from her skin. "Do you want to bring the entire ship down on our heads? Father put me in charge. If you damage the asset before I can analyze it, I will report that you directly disobeyed his orders." Neji froze, his hand crackling with power. The threat wasn't the poison. It was the appeal to their father's authority. Disobeying Judge was a far greater crime than bullying their sister. He glared at Naruto, who was now standing calmly by the door, not even breathing heavily. The boy hadn't landed a single punch, but he had unequivocally won the exchange. "TCH. This isn't over," Neji spat, retracting his energy. "Next time, I won't miss." "Whatever," Yanji grumbled, pulling his fist from the dented floor. "He's no fun. Just runs around." The two brothers stormed out of the medical bay, leaving a trail of destruction and a heavy, tense silence in their wake. Naruto finally allowed his body to relax. A wave of exhaustion washed over him, far more potent than the pain. He had pushed himself too hard. He leaned against the wall for support, his breathing becoming ragged. Reiju turned to him, her expression a complex mixture of awe, frustration, and a dawning, terrifying curiosity. "What are you?" she asked again, her voice barely a whisper. This was no mere assassin. This was something else entirely. Naruto looked at her, truly looked at her. And as he did, the whispers of the future faded, replaced by something else. An echo. He saw a flash of an image. Clearer than any he'd had before. It wasn't a premonition. It was a memory. Her memory. A small girl with pink hair, standing alone in a cold, metallic corridor. Her three brothers surround her. Their faces cruel masks of derision. They punch her, kick her. She doesn't cry. She doesn't fight back. She just takes it, her face a blank, a motionless shield, while inside, a small, fragile spirit is screaming. The vision was so vivid, so painful, it took his breath away. He saw not the composed, dangerous woman standing before him, but the broken child she had been forced to become. The genetic modifications that made her brothers monsters had also given her the gift of empathy, a gift her family treated as a defect to be beaten out of her. The insight was so sudden, so profound, it changed everything. He wasn't looking at a captor anymore. He was looking at a fellow prisoner. He pushed himself off the wall, his gaze softening. The exhaustion was still there, but a new strength, born of understanding, took its place. "They've always been like that, haven't they?" he said, his voice quiet. Reiju froze. Her carefully constructed composure didn't just crack, it shattered. Every defense she had ever built, every wall she had ever erected, crumbled to dust in the face of that simple, knowing question. He wasn't supposed to know that. No one was. It was a truth she had buried so deep she barely acknowledged it herself. How could he possibly know? She stared at him, her blue eye wide with a vulnerability she hadn't shown in over a decade. For the first time, she saw not an asset, not a weapon, but a boy with eyes that saw far too much. Eyes that had looked past the poison, past the Germa princess, and had seen the prisoner within. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room. Her movements stiff, mechanical. The door slid shut behind her, leaving Naruto alone in the wreckage, the hum of the ship his only companion. He was weak, he was lost, and he was trapped in a world he didn't understand, surrounded by enemies. But for the first time, he felt a flicker of something that wasn't despair. It was a connection, a fragile, dangerous, and utterly unexpected thread of understanding. And in a world of monsters, that was something worth fighting for. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Gilded Cage and the Poison Kiss. The room was a cage, albeit a comfortable one. The bed was soft, the sterile white walls were spotless, and meals arrived 3 times a day with silent, unnerving punctuality. But the door was sealed, the single window was made of a crystalline material that Naruto's fists couldn't even scratch, and the ever-present hum of the ship was a constant reminder of his imprisonment. For Naruto Uzumaki, it was a special kind of hell. He spent his time in motion, pacing the length of the room, 10 steps one way, 10 steps back. Performing push-ups until his arms screamed, sit-ups until his core burned. He was channeling his restless energy, forcing his body to heal, to remember its strength. The deep well of his chakra was slowly refilling, and he could feel Kurama's presence in the back of his mind, a slumbering mountain of power, stirring with the slow, tectonic rhythm of recovery. But his physical training was secondary. His primary focus was the chaotic new sense that flooded his mind. At first, it had been an untamed torrent, a cacophony of possible futures that threatened to sweep him away. Now, he was learning to navigate the storm. He would sit for hours, eyes closed, not in meditation, but in intense concentration. He learned to filter the noise, to push aside the endless stream of meaningless data, the drip of a leaky pipe 2 decks below, the flutter of a flag in the wind miles away, and focus on what mattered. He started small. He would predict the exact second his food would arrive, visualizing the robotic trolley stopping at his door. He learned the patrol routes of the guards in the corridor, their footsteps a predictable rhythm in the song of the future. He could see their movements as faint, ghostly afterimages laid over the present. The guard on the left will stop to adjust his helmet in 5 seconds. The one on the right will yawn in 10. The small, successful predictions were anchors, helping him gain control over the raging sea in his head. He was in the middle of this practice, sensing the approach of a familiar, graceful footstep, when the door to his room hissed open. Vinsmoke Reiju entered, carrying a tray herself this time. The robotic trolleys had stopped coming after. He'd accurately predicted and dodged a sedative dart hidden in a bowl of soup 3 days prior. Her composure was a fortress, rebuilt and reinforced since their last encounter. But Naruto's sight pierced the stone walls. He could see the faint lines of tension around her visible eye, the subtle way her hand tightened on the tray when she first looked at him. She was wary of him. She was wary of what he could see. She placed the tray on a small table. The silence between them was thick, charged with unspoken questions. Naruto chose not to break it. He simply watched her, his senses open, feeling the currents of her intent. He had learned that with this power, listening was more important than speaking. It was Reiju who finally spoke, her voice the same cool, clinical tone she always used, but the words themselves were a warning. "My father is growing impatient." She looked at him directly, her blue eyes searching his. "He sees you as one of 2 things, a weapon to be claimed or a threat to be eliminated. The demonstration you gave my brothers did nothing to discourage his interest. In fact, it solidified it." Naruto's future sight flared, confirming her words. He saw branching paths, nightmarish visions of his immediate future swirling around him. In one, he was strapped to a cold, metal table, judge's masked face looming over him, tools of dissection gleaming in the harsh light. In another, a black collar was clasped around his neck, and he was forced to fight in an arena against hulking cyborg beasts for the amusement of armored soldiers. In a third, he was simply executed, his body rendered down for scientific study. The visions were so real he could almost feel the cold steel against his skin. He pushed the images away, his expression hardening. He was trapped, and his options were dwindling. He needed a map, a guide, an ally, even a reluctant one. He met her gaze, cutting through the layers of pretense. "What do you want, Reiju?" The directness of the question startled her. It wasn't the response she had expected. She had anticipated defiance, anger, or fear. Not a calm, analytical query that put the focus squarely on her. For a moment, her fortress wavered. "What I want is irrelevant." She deflected, turning away to adjust a vial on the tray. "I don't think so," Naruto pressed, his voice quiet but firm. "I saw what you did. You stood up to them. To your brothers, to your father. You didn't have to do that. So I'll ask again. What do you want?" Reiju's shoulders stiffened. She slowly turned back to him, her expression unreadable. "You see a great deal, don't you?" She murmured. A long moment passed. My father's ambition is the only thing that has ever mattered, she began, her voice low. He created us, his children, for a single purpose, to conquer the North Blue and restore the Vinsmoke family to its former glory. He is a brilliant scientist, but he sees the world, and everyone in it, as an experiment. We are his greatest successes. Stronger, faster, and more durable than any normal human. And devoid of unnecessary emotions. The last words were spoken with a hint of bitterness so faint that only someone with Naruto's perception could have caught it. As she spoke, his sight flickered again, not with a vision of the future, but of the past. It was her memory, an echo bleeding into the present. A younger Reiju, no older than 8, stands by impassively as Ichiji, Niji. And Yonji brutally beat a smaller, blonde-haired boy. The boy is crying, but his eyes are full of defiant fire. He wants to be a chef. He dreams of a mythical sea. Her brothers laugh at his weakness. Their fists flying. Reiju watches, her face a perfect, emotionless mask, but Naruto can feel the scream of empathy trapped inside her, a prisoner in her own genetically modified body. The name echoes in the memory, Sanji. The vision was gone as quickly as it came, but the weight of it remained. He understood. She wasn't just a jailer, she was a prisoner in the same gilded cage. I can't help you win a war, Naruto said, his voice softening with the echo of her own pain. But I don't want to be anyone's weapon. He looked her in the eye, making his decision. Help me understand where I am. Give me the information I need to survive in this world. In return, I promise I won't tear a hole in the side of this ship and swim for the horizon. For now, it wasn't a threat, it was a statement of capability, a gesture of truce. He was offering her a temporary alliance, an alternative to the futures he'd seen where this ended in violence and dissection. Reiju stared at him, truly considering his offer. This strange, unpredictable boy was a variable her father could not control. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was a variable she could use. A path that didn't add to her family simply acquiring another mindless tool of war. Very well, she said finally, a decision made. A limited partnership. She reached into a pocket of her uniform and produced a sleek, black datapad, thin as a sheet of glass. She placed it on the table. This contains basic knowledge, maps of the 4 blues and the Grand Line, information on the major political powers, the world government, the Marines, and information on abilities that exist in this world, things you might find familiar. Naruto picked up the device. It was light, cool to the touch. With a tap, the screen lit up, displaying a map of a world that was utterly alien to him. He spent the next hour absorbing everything, his mind, honed for learning complex jutsu, soaking up the information like a sponge. The world was vast, mostly ocean, dotted with countless islands. The political structure was complex, a global government battling against an age of pirates. It was overwhelming, but fascinating. Then he found the section Reiju had mentioned. It was labeled Haki. He read the description of the 3 types: armament, conquerors, and observation. It was the last one that made his breath catch in his chest. A power that allowed the user to sense the presence of others, to predict their movements. The text described an advanced form, a level of mastery so rare it was considered legendary, that allowed the user to see a short period into the future. He finally had a name for it. It wasn't a bloodline limit. It wasn't some strange evolution of Sage Mode. It was Haki, Future Sight Haki. The knowledge settled in his mind, not as a revelation, but as a confirmation of a truth he already felt. It gave him a framework, a language to understand the power that had saved his life and stranded him in this new reality. You found it. Reiju's voice cut through his concentration. She had been watching him, silent and patient. The way you evaded my brothers, it was more than just speed. That's what this is, isn't it? Naruto looked up from the datapad. I think so. I'm still learning. Show me, she said, her voice a quiet command. It wasn't a challenge. It was the request of a scientist, a plea for understanding. Naruto nodded. He closed his eyes, filtering out the immediate surroundings, casting his senses out through the metal corridors of the ship like a net. He found a target, a soldier 3 corridors away, making his rounds. There's a guard on patrol in Sector GAMMA7, Naruto said, his eyes still closed. He's about to turn a corner. In 3 seconds, he's going to trip on a loose floor panel. He won't fall, but he'll drop the rifle he's carrying. It will clatter on the floor. Reiju watched him, her breath held. The seconds ticked by in silence. 1, 2, 3. From deep within the ship, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of a heavy object hitting the metal deck with a sharp clatter. Reiju's visible eye widened, her mask of scientific detachment completely gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated awe. She had read the reports. She had heard the legends of powerful individuals in the New World who could perform such feats. But to witness it firsthand, it was to see the impossible made real. The power this boy wielded was not a science that Germa could replicate. It was something else entirely. Before she could speak, the door to the room slid open with a heavy, authoritative thud. Vinsmoke Judge stood there, a mountain of gold and steel. His long, dark beard flowed over a chest plate emblazoned with the Germa 66 symbol, and his helmet cast his face in shadow, save for the glint of his cold, calculating eyes. He was flanked by Ichiji and Niji, their expressions a mixture of smugness and contempt. Judge's presence was a physical force, an oppressive aura of absolute authority that seemed to suck the very air out of the room. His gaze swept past his daughter as if she were a piece of furniture, landing solely on Naruto. So, Judge's voice was a low rumble, like grinding stones. This is the anomaly. You have caused quite a stir, boy. Naruto's haki went berserk. The controlled stream of information became a raging flood. Judge's intent was a chaotic storm of ambition, avarice, and chillingly detached cruelty. The dozen nightmarish futures he had seen before now seemed like a certainty, the paths leading to them shortening with every second the Vinsmoke Patriarch stood in the room. Judge took a step forward, his metal boots clanging on the floor. Your power is wasted on a sentimental fool from a forgotten land. A protector of nothing. Join Germa 66. I will give you what you lack. Strength, purpose, a destiny. You will be the ultimate weapon in my army, the pinnacle of my new generation of soldiers. Together, we will take our rightful place as the rulers of the North Blue. He paused, letting the offer hang in the air. Refuse, and I will simply take what I need from your corpse. My scientists will be just as happy to study you piece by piece. The offer was a command. The choice was an illusion. Naruto felt the crushing weight of Judge's will, a force as potent as any cages. But he had stood on a battlefield drenched in the blue of his comrades and stared into the eyes of a self-proclaimed god. He had faced down Madara Uchiha. He was not so easily intimidated. He stood up, his gaze steady, his own will a quiet, unshakable flame against the storm. My power isn't a tool for tyrants. Judge let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of any humor. Such childish ideals. You think morality has a place in the pursuit of power. You are more naive than I thought. Ichiji, Niji, subdue him. Try not to damage the specimen excessively. With pleasure, father, Niji sneered, electricity already dancing around his knuckles. Ichiji simply grinned, a flicker of crimson light in his eyes. This time, he won't be so lucky. They moved, a blur of red and blue, a perfectly synchronized assault of light and electricity. Naruto's eyes flickered, the paths of their attacks already laid bare before him. He tensed, ready to dance the impossible dance once more. But this time, someone else moved first. A flash of pink, Reiju PPED directly between Naruto and her oncoming brothers, her arm outstretched, her body a slender, defiant barrier. Father, stop. The entire room froze. Ichiji and Niji skidded to a halt, their attacks dissipating. Their faces masks of sheer disbelief. Reiju had just directly and publicly defied their father. It was an act of insubordination so profound it was almost unthinkable. Naruto's haki shish owed him a terrifyingly clear vision. Judge's gauntlet, wreathed in electricity, striking Reiju across the face, sending her crashing into the wall. He instinctively tensed, ready to spring forward, intercept the blow that was already a memory in his mind. But it didn't happen. The future wavered, then shattered. Judge did not move. He was staring at his daughter, not with rage, but with a flicker of genuine surprise. Of scientific curiosity at this unexpected development in his experiment. Reiju pressed her momentary advantage, her voice cold and steady, betraying none of the terror she must have felt. You said this was my responsibility. A direct assault is crude. It will yield no useful data and will likely damage the asset. He is not a mindless beast. He responds to logic, not force. Allow me to continue my analysis. I will convince him of the benefits of aligning with Germa. She said the words, a perfect echo of their family's cold pragmatism. But Naruto could feel her true intent, a desperate, protective shield thrown up around him. She wasn't trying to convince him. She was buying him time. She was saving his life. Judge stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. The silence was so heavy Naruto could feel the air vibrating with tension. Then, the Vinsmoke King threw his head back and laughed, that same humorless, grating sound. Very well, Reiju. You have always been the most cunning. 1 week. He held up a single, gauntleted finger. You have 1 week to convince this asset of his purpose. If you fail, he let the threat hang in the air, a promise of consequences far worse than a simple beating. The failure will be yours to bear. He turned and swept out of the room, his cape billowing behind him. Ichiji and Niji followed, but not before shooting daggers of pure hatred at both Naruto and their sister. The cage door hissed shut, leaving a silence that was even heavier than before. Naruto looked at Reiju, a new, profound respect dawning in his eyes. She had faced down a tyrant for him. You just stuck your neck out for me, he said, his voice quiet. Why? Reiju turned to face him, the fortress of her composure already being rebuilt, stone by painstaking stone. But her eye held a universe of complex emotions she couldn't hide from his sight. My father's methods are inefficient, she said, the excuse sounding flimsy even to her own ears. A broken weapon is of no use to anyone. She took a step toward him, then another. Naruto's haki didn't scream danger. It hummed with an emotion he couldn't name, a mixture of desperation, defiance, and a deep, aching sadness. She stopped directly in front of him, so close he could feel the faint warmth radiating from her. But don't mistake my actions for kindness, she whispered, her voice a low murmur that was for him alone. I am my father's daughter. I am poison pink. Before Naruto could process the words, she leaned in. Her hand came up to gently cup his cheek, and she pressed her lips to his. The kiss was a paradox. It was cold and deliberate, yet there was an undercurrent of desperate warmth. It wasn't born of passion, but of something far more complex. A tingling sensation spread across his lips. Sharp but not unpleasant. The faint taste of something sweet, like exotic flowers, filled his senses. She pulled back just as quickly, her face unreadable, save for the faint, sad ill that touched her lips but not her eye. Welcome to the Germa Kingdom, Naruto Uzumaki. She turned and walked out, the door sliding shut behind her, leaving him standing alone in the center of his cage. He was stunned into silence. The tingling on his lips a stark reminder of her actions. It had been a warning, a claim, a plea, a promise. He now had an ally. But she was an ally forged in poison and pain. As much a prisoner of this kingdom as he was. And he had a terrifying feeling that in saving him, she may have just condemned herself. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The King's Gambit and the Brothers' Grudge. The Gilded Cage had become a war room. In the 4 days following Judge's ultimatum, the dynamic between Naruto and Reiju had undergone a seismic shift. The door to his room remained locked, but Reiju was a constant presence. The unspoken truce between them solidifying into a fragile, secret alliance. She was his sole source of information, a lifeline to the alien world he now inhabited. The sleek datapad she'd given him was a treasure trove, but Reiju was the key to understanding it. She provided context, nuance, and, most importantly, schematics. Blueprints of the entire Germa Kingdom, patrol routes, energy conduit layouts, and personnel files on key soldiers were spread across the bed in holographic displays. Naruto absorbed it all, his mind, once used to memorizing hand seals and chakra theory, now mapping the arteries of his prison. He's preparing for something big, Reiju said, her voice a low murmur. They were huddled over a projection of the Grand Line, a swirl of treacherous seas and impossible weather patterns. The Reverie, a council of kings from across the world. Germa's attendance was approved, but our status is probationary. We are a nation without land. A science kingdom viewed with suspicion by the established powers. Father needs to make a statement. He needs leverage. And he thinks I'm that leverage, Naruto finished, his eyes tracing the projected map. He could feel her anxiety. A low hum beneath her calm exterior. The 1-week deadline was a guillotine hanging over her head. He doesn't think it. He's certain of it, she corrected. FTER what he saw. What you did to my brothers. He no longer sees you as just a potential soldier. He sees you as a symbol. A weapon that can't be touched. The ultimate bodyguard. The perfect assassin. A king's most valuable tool. Their partnership had fallen into a quiet rhythm. He would sense her approach long before she reached his door, and she, in turn, had learned to trust his strange insights. Yesterday, she had brought him a bowl of miso ramen, a dish synthesized from the ship's nutrient stores after he'd idly mentioned a craving for it. The taste was synthetic, a pale imitation of Ichiraku's. But the gesture was a crack in her Vinsmoke armor, a sliver of warmth in the cold, metallic world. Just this morning, he'd stopped her mid-sentence with a quiet, "Watch your step," an instant before a service droid, unseen by either of them, whizzed past her feet. She hadn't even flinched, her trust in his sight now implicit. He's getting impatient, Naruto stated, not as a question, but as a fact gleaned from the faint tremors he could feel in the ship's hierarchy. He needs to see progress. Reiju nodded, her pink hair brushing against the holographic map. He's scheduled a combat assessment for you in the main training hall. It's a performance. He wants to show you off to his commanders. She looked at him, her one visible eye filled with a deep, conflicted worry. He's expecting a monster, Naruto. A beast of unrestrained power. Then we'll give him something else, Naruto said, a glint in his blue eyes. Something he won't understand. Something that will scare him more than any Rasengan ever could. The training hall was colossal. A cavernous, circular chamber with ceilings so high they were lost in shadow, ringed by observation decks. Hundreds of Germa soldiers, clad in their identical, insectoid armor, stood in silent, disciplined ranks, their collective gaze fixed on the lone figure in the center of the arena floor. The air was cold, sterile, and thick with anticipation. Naruto stood calmly, his tattered orange jacket replaced by a simple black training uniform provided by Reiju. He felt the weight of every stare, the curiosity, the skepticism, the bloodlust. He ignored it all, closing his eyes and letting his haki expand, painting a perfect, 360-degree picture of the room in his mind. He could feel the rhythmic breathing of the soldiers, the faint electrical hum of the lights, the cold ambition radiating from the VIP observation deck where Judge stood, flanked by his sons. With a deafening clang, 4 massive gates on the arena's perimeter slammed open. From each, a new kind of enemy emerged. They weren't human. They were hulking, bipedal machines, cyborgs plated in thick, gray armor, their single, glowing red eyes fixed on him. Each one brandished a different weapon system. A Gatling laser, a plasma cannon, a superheated vibro blade. Judge's voice boomed over an unseen intercom, a voice of iron and command. Protocol 7. Assess and neutralize the target. Quote, the cyborgs moved in unison, their metallic feet thudding against the floor. Their movements were precise, their targeting systems locking onto him instantly. They were designed to be the perfect soldiers, fearless, relentless, and utterly predictable. For Naruto's future sight, they were an open book. A Gatling laser opened fire, spitting a stream of searing red bolts. A plasma cannon charged with a high-pitched whine. The 2 swordsmen charged, their blades glowing with white-hot energy. Naruto moved. He didn't explode with speed. He didn't form a single jutsu. He simply took a single, unhurried step to his left. The torrent of laser fire ripped through the space where he had been standing, scorching the metal floor. The plasma blast detonated against the far wall in a concussive boom. He flowed around the charging swordsman like water around a stone, his hand darting out to tap the elbow joint of one, causing its blade to swing wide and empty itself in the chassis of its compatriot. He was untouchable. He moved not in reaction to their attacks, but in anticipation of them. It was a dance of chilling perfection. He weaved through a storm of lethal energy. His movements so economical he barely seemed to be trying. The soldiers in the stands, trained for high-speed warfare, watched in stunned silence. They were witnessing a level of defensive mastery that bordered on the supernatural. He wasn't just dodging. He was using their own programming against them. He saw the trajectory of every shot, the arc of every swing, before the cyborg GS had even fully committed to the action. He would position himself in a blind spot, forcing two of them to fire on each other. He would use the handle of a discarded blade to deflect a laser bolt into the power core of another. He disabled all four of the advanced war machines in less than a minute, without landing a single direct punch. He came to a stop in the center of the arena, not even breathing heavily, leaving a trail of smoking, short-circuited metal behind him. The hall was utterly silent. This wasn't the display of raw, destructive power Judge had expected. This was something far more terrifying. This was a demonstration of absolute control. The silence was shattered by a single, mocking clap. "Bravo!" Niji's voice dripped with condescending fury as he leapt from the observation deck, landing on the arena floor with a crackle of blue electricity. "A wonderful little dance. You've proven you can play with toys." He stalked towards Naruto, his fists sparking, his face a mask of pure, undiluted rage. The public display of Naruto's unique skill, combined with the memory of his own humiliation in the medical bay, had pushed his princely pride past the breaking point. "Now," Niji snarled, "fight a real Vinsmoke. Enough dancing. Fight me, anomaly." From the observation deck, Judge watched, his face an unreadable shadow beneath his helmet. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He allowed it. This was the true test. Reiju leaned forward, her hands gripping the railing. "Father, no, this wasn't part of the assessment. Stay out of this, sister." Niji roared without looking back. "This is a matter of pride." Naruto faced him, his posture relaxed, his senses focused. The chaotic storm of Niji's anger was a beacon for his haki. It was a wild, uncontrolled fire, and every flicker, every spark, telegraphed his every move. The duel began without another word. Niji vanished. He became a blur of motion, a living current of electricity, moving at a speed that LD have been impossible for the naked eye to follow. He was rage and lightning, his attacks aimed not to disable, but to kill. But Naruto's eyes weren't following him. His mind was already ahead of him. He stood almost perfectly still in the center of the arena. The world around him became a tapestry of lethal possibilities, a storm of blue lightning, and he was the calm eye at its center. He saw Niji's path not as it happened, but as it was about to happen. A high-voltage kick aimed at his head. Naruto tilted his head back, the electrified boot skimming past his nose with a loud hiss. A jab of pure lightning aimed for his heart. Naruto took a half step to the right, letting the bolt of energy scorch the air beside his ribs. A sweeping attack designed to take out his legs. Naruto lifted one foot, a simple, elegant motion. As the arc of electricity passed harmlessly beneath it, Niji's attacks became a frantic, furious barrage. He was a storm of blue light, a whirlwind of speed and power, throwing everything he had at the stationary figure. And everything missed. By a hair's breadth. By a fraction of an inch. Every single time. The hundreds of soldiers watched, their disciplined minds unable to process what they were seeing. It was impossible. No one was that fast. No one could react with that kind of precision. It was infuriating. It was humiliating. Niji was the pinnacle of Germa science, a prince bred for war. And he couldn't land a single blow on an opponent who was barely even moving. "Stand still and fight me," he screamed, his voice raw with frustration. And then, Naruto started to talk. His voice was calm, conversational, cutting through Niji's rage with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "You're telegraphing your right hook," Naruto said, sidestepping a punch that could have shattered steel. "The charge in your knuckles fluctuates a half second before you throw it." Niji roared and launched a flurry of attacks. "You favor your left leg for aerial attacks," Naruto continued, ducking under a spinning kick. "It puts your entire right side off balance for a critical moment. You're fast, but you're not efficient." Every word was a psychological blow, streaky, deeper than any physical attack could. He wasn't just dodging. He was analyzing, dissecting, and articulating every flaw in Niji's perfect, genetically engineered fighting style. He was unwriting the Vinsmoke Prince's very identity. Pushed beyond reason, his pride shattered in front of the entire army, Niji lost control. Enough, he bellowed, his body exploding with a blinding aura of blue energy. I'll incinerate you, Henry Blazer. Quote, he became a living bolt of lightning, his entire body a projectile of pure, electrified force aimed straight at Naruto's heart. It was his ultimate technique, a final, desperate gambit of overwhelming speed and power. Naruto's world resolved into a single, shining line of fate. He saw the attack's path, the surge of ions, the precise moment of impact. The entire future of the next 2 seconds was laid bare before him. And he did not dodge. He stood his ground as the screaming blue comet of his opponent closed the distance in a nanosecond. The soldiers gasped. Reiju's heart stopped. At the last possible moment, as Niji's electrified fist was a mere inch from his chest, poised to obliterate him, Naruto moved. It wasn't a block. It wasn't a counter. It was a simple, fluid motion. He took one step to the side, his body flowing with the current of Niji's own attack. At the same time, his hand came up, not in a fist, but with an open palm. He gently, almost casually, placed it on the back of Niji's shoulder as the Vinsmoke Prince hurtled past him. It was the smallest of pushes. A gentle nudge, but combined with the unstoppable, catastrophic momentum of Niji's own charge. It was devastating. Niji's trajectory shifted ever so slightly. He was no longer in control. He was a missile without a guidance system. He shot past Naruto and crashed, head first, into the thick steel wall of the training hall with a sound like a thunderclap. The impact was immense, his own kinetic energy and electrical power shorting out in a massive, blinding flash. The wall buckled, a deep crater forming around the Vinsmoke Prince's unconscious, sparking form. The training hall was plunged into a dead, ringing silence. Naruto stood in the center of the arena, his posture unchanged, his breathing even. He hadn't been touched. He hadn't thrown a single punch. He had won by making his enemy's greatest strength his own undoing. He slowly raised his head, his gaze sweeping past the stunned soldiers, past the embedded form of his opponent, and landing on the observation deck. He looked directly at Vinsmoke Judge. The king was not angry. He was not disappointed. Behind the shadowed visor of his helmet, Naruto could feel it. A cold, terrifying, and avaricious glee. This was so much better than he had ever imagined. Not a wild beast to be tamed, but a weapon of impossible finesse. A perfect, untouchable shield, an absolute defense. The value of his new asset had just increased 1,000-fold. Reiju rushed from the observation deck, her boots silent as she ran to Naruto's side. She ignored the stares of the soldiers, ignored her fallen brother. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice a frantic whisper, her cool facade completely gone. "I'm fine," Naruto said, his eyes still locked on the silent, imposing figure of the king. "But I think we just made things a lot worse." He could see it now, clear as day. A future where the walls of his cage were no longer just steel, but gilded with the crushing weight of his own incalculable worth. He hadn't won his freedom. He had just become the most prized possession in the Vinsmoke Kingdom. Chapter 4 End. C. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Dark and the Weight of a Crown. Luxury was a language Naruto Uzumaki did not speak. He had been moved from the sterile confines of the medical bay to a suite of rooms that could have belonged to a feudal lord. The floors were covered in thick, plush carpets that swallowed the sound of his footsteps. The bed was a mountain of silk sheets and soft pillows. A large, reinforced window offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the endless, churning sea. It was magnificent, it was opulent, and it was the most suffocating prison he had ever known. Each luxury was a link in a chain, heavier than any steel. The finely prepared meals, the elegant clothes that had replaced his tattered uniform, the respectful, fearful way the guards now avoided his gaze, it was all part of Judge's new strategy. He was no longer a captive to be interrogated, he was an asset to be placated, a treasure to be secured. He was a sword being polished before it was put on display. He stood before the vast window, staring out at the horizon, but his senses were turned inward. His future sight Haki was becoming a part of him, no longer a chaotic storm but a deep, flowing river. It was still difficult to control, but he was learning to navigate its currents. He could feel the pulse of the ship kingdom around him, not just the thrum of its engines, but its emotional heartbeat. He could feel the ambition of Vinsmoke Judge, a cold, Oppressive weight that settled over everything like a shroud. He could feel the simmering resentment of the soldiers, the fear of his power, and the burning, focused hatred of Niji. Recuperating decks below, a wound not just to his body but to his very soul. The river of the future was treacherous. He learned that looking too far ahead was like staring into the sun. The possibilities were too vast, too blinding, and left him with a pounding headache. But the immediate future, the next few minutes, the next hour, was becoming clearer. He could see the emotional currents in people, the faint auras of their intent that shimmered around them just before they acted. He felt a familiar presence approaching, a current of conflicted emotions, anxiety, resolve, and a sliver of warmth that was uniquely hers. A moment later, a soft chime sounded and the door to his suite slid open. Reiju entered, carrying a small medical kit. She had shed her raid suit for a simple, elegant dress. But she moved with the same predatory grace. Her gaze swept the room, taking in his somber mood. Since the assessment, the pretense between them had vanished. They were no longer jailer and prisoner. They were conspirators, trapped on opposite sides of a chessboard, trying to prevent the king from sacrificing all the pieces for a victory only he desired. "I heard father relocated you," she said, her voice soft. "He believes he can buy your loyalty with comfort. He's decorating the cage," Naruto replied, his gaze still fixed on the endless ocean. "It's still a cage." She walked towards him, her footsteps silent on the thick carpet. "You have a small cut on your cheek," she observed, her clinical eye noticing a thin red line he hadn't even felt. A piece of shrapnel from the cyborg he'd disabled must have grazed him. "It's healing already, but it should be cleaned. My father's machines are not known for their hygiene." She opened the kit, and Naruto turned to face her. He sat on the edge of the large bed as she dabbed the cut with an antiseptic wipe. Her touch was gentle, practiced, her proximity creating a small, quiet space in the vast, oppressive suite. For a moment, they were just two people. Not a Vinsmoke princess and a trans-dimensional weapon. "Your display in the training hall was effective," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Too effective. You didn't show him a beast he could tame. You showed him a god he could leash. What does he want from you?" Naruto asked, sensing the anxiety rolling off her in waves. Reiju's hand paused for a fraction of a second. "He's made me your official liaison. My new purpose is to ensure your compliance. To make you understand the logic of his vision." She finished cleaning the cut and put the wipe away. Her movements precise and controlled, a stark contrast to the turmoil he could feel within her. "He sees my empathy, my defect, as a tool to manipulate you. He thinks I can appeal to your sentimentality. Is that what you're doing now?" he asked, his voice neutral. She met his gaze, and her mask of composure cracked. He could see the exhaustion in her one visible eye, the crushing weight of her father's expectations. "I am trying to keep you alive, Naruto. And myself. After I defied him, my position is more precarious than ever. Our fates are now tied. If you run, I will be the one who pays the price." Her words hung in the air, a truth as heavy and unyielding as the steel hull of the ship. Their strange alliance, born of a moment of empathy in a storm, had become a suicide pact. The medical bay was quiet. The only sound the faint hum of diagnostic machines. Niji lay on a bio bed, his body covered in sensors. The physical wounds were healing, his genetically enhanced body knitting together the broken bones and torn muscles from his catastrophic collision with the wall. The wounds to his pride, however, were festering. Ichiji and Yanji stood by his bedside. Yanji, ever the brute, was clenching and unclenching his powerful fists. "I don't get it," he grumbled. "How could you not hit him? You're the fastest of all of us." Niji's eyes, fixed on the white ceiling, burned with a cold, electric fury. "It wasn't about speed," he hissed, his voice hoarse. "It was like he knew. He wasn't just dodging. He was making a fool of me. He was," Ichiji stated, his voice a blade of cold steel. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his expression one of detached, dangerous analysis. Unlike his brothers, his anger was a focused, calculated thing. His ability transcends simple combat prowess. Brute force is useless against him. Speed is irrelevant. He operates on a different axis of battle entirely. "So what do we do?" Yanji demanded. Father is treating him like a prized pet. He gave him the royal suite. Father sees a new, perfect weapon, Ichiji corrected, a cruel smile playing on his lips. But every weapon has a trigger. And every man has a breaking point. If the asset cannot be controlled through force or placated by luxury, he pushed himself off the wall and walked to the foot of Niji's bed, his crimson raid suit seeming to drink the light from the room. Then it must be broken in a different way. Emotionally, psychologically. We need to find what he values. We need to find his weakness. And then, we will crush it in front of him. Niji's furious gaze shifted to his older brother, a slow, malevolent understanding dawning in his eyes. The humiliation he felt began to twist and reshape itself into a new, more insidious form of vengeance. The summons came, as Naruto knew it would. Not with a squad of guards, but with a polite, formal invitation delivered by Reiju. Judge wanted to see him. Not in a training hall or a lab, but in the heart of his kingdom, the throne room. The throne room was a monument to megalomania. A vast, echoing chamber of black marble and gold, dominated by a massive, spiked throne upon which Vinsmoke Judge sat. He was not in his battle armor, but in royal regalia, a heavy cape draped over his shoulders. The effect was no less intimidating. Naruto walked the long path to the foot of the throne, Reiju a silent shadow a few paces behind him. He felt the weight of Judge's gaze, a palpable force of will. This was not an interrogation. It was an audience with a king. You have proven yourself a remarkable specimen, Naruto Uzumaki. Judge began, his voice rumbling through the cavernous hall. Your abilities are, I confess, beyond even my own scientific understanding. They are a force of nature. And a force of nature should not be wasted on foolish, sentimental ideals. He leaned forward, his shadowed eyes glinting. I am offering you a place in the new world order I am building. A chance for real purpose. Germa is on the cusp of its greatest achievement. We are about to forge an alliance with one of the 4 emperors of the sea, the pirate queen, Big Mom. Naruto's haki flared, sensing the immense gravity of those words. He saw flashes of a whimsical, terrifying land made of candy and pastries, ruled by a monstrous woman with a hunger that could devour the world. This alliance will be sealed through a marriage. Judge continued, his voice dripping with satisfaction. A political union between our great houses. My third son, Sanji, will be the groom. The name struck Naruto like a physical blow. Sanji, the boy from Reiju's memory. The small, blonde child with defiant eyes, who dreamed of the sea and was beaten for it. The brother who had escaped. He is a failure, Judge said, the disgust in his voice clear. A defect who disgraced the Vinsmoke name with his commoner's dreams. He fled his duties. But now, his time has come to be of use. He will marry Big Mom's daughter, and Germ. Will have the power of an emperor at its back. He finally came to the point, his voice a low, tempting growl. Your task is simple, a recovery mission. You will be the instrument of my will. Go to the place where he hides. This floating restaurant, and retrieve him. Bring my son back to fulfill his destiny. Do this, and your place in my kingdom is assured. You will have power, wealth, a position second only to my own family. You will be a prince in all but name. Refuse, he smiled, a cold, metallic thing, and we go back to the alternative. The laboratory table is always waiting. It was a command dressed as an offer. A demand wrapped in the illusion of choice. He was being asked to become a slave catcher. To drag a man who had found freedom back to the hell he'd escaped. It was anathema to every fiber of his being. He looked up at the king on his throne, and in that moment, his haki pierced the veil. Not of the future, but of something far beyond. The throne room vanished. He was adrift in a cold, star-dusted void. Below him was a chart, not of the sea, but of the cosmos. He saw constellations he had never seen, swirling nebulae of impossible colors. A hand, draped in pristine white, moved across the chart. A single, elegant finger tracing a line between 2 galaxies. And then, a voice echoed in the void of his mind, a voice so ancient and arrogant it made Judge sound like a petulant child. The tear in the veil has been located. A stray spark of the progenitor's flame has manifested in this primitive reality. It must be catalogued and extinguished before it learns what it is. The vision shattered, dumping him back into the cold marble of the throne room. A lance of pure agony shot through his skull. He staggered, clutching his head, a gasp escaping his lips. He had been seen. Across dimensions, across realities, something had turned its gaze upon him, and the casual, cosmic pressure of its attention was almost enough to break his mind. "What is it, boy?" Judge's voice boomed, irritated by the interruption. "Is the weight of your new destiny too much for you?" Naruto pushed the pain down, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at Judge, at this self-proclaimed king with his petty ambitions of conquering a single sea, and he almost laughed. Judge was an ant, posturing at the foot of a volcano, utterly oblivious to the true scale of the universe. He straightened up, the pain receding into a dull throb, replaced by a cold, unshakable certainty. His choice was no longer just about his own freedom. It was about something far greater. "No," Naruto said, his voice quiet but echoing with a newfound strength in the silent hall. He met the king's gaze without fear. "I will not be your attack dog. And I won't help you enslave your own son. My power is for protecting people, not for breaking them." Judge's expression hardened, the facade of temptation melting away to reveal the tyrant beneath. The rage was there, but it was secondary to a profound, almost scientific bewilderment. He simply could not comprehend it. It was like a prized rifle refusing to fire on moral grounds. It was an illogical, infuriating malfunction. "You choose the table, then," Judge said, his voice flat and cold. "A foolish, sentimental choice. Reiju, escort the acid back to his quarters. We will begin the vivisection at dawn." Later that night, Naruto stood before the window of his suite. The pain in his head a dull echo of the terrifying vision. The sea was a black, churning void, a mirror of the cosmic emptiness he had just witnessed. He was so far from home. And he had an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't comprehend, an enemy that viewed him as a bug to be squashed. The door slid open. Reiju entered, her face pale, her movements stiff. She had seen the look in her father's eyes. Dawn was not a threat, it was a promise. "He means it," she whispered. "I know," Naruto said, not turning from the window. He finally looked at her, his blue eyes filled with an intensity she had never seen before. "He told me about your brother, Sanji." Reiju flinched as if he had struck her. The name was a ghost, a constant, silent ache she had carried for years. "He's your brother, Reiju," Naruto pressed, his voice gentle but firm. "The one who got away. The one who dreamed of something more than this." Her composure, her lifetime of Vinsmoke training, the walls she had built around her heart, finally completely crumbled. A single, perfect tear welled in her visible eye, overflowed, and traced a glistening path down her cheek. It was a tear for the kind, gentle boy she had watched her brother's torment. A tear for the child she had been too weak, too afraid to protect. Naruto stepped closer to her, his presence a surprising comfort in the cold, luxurious room. He made a vow, not just to himself, but to the broken princess in front of him. "I'm not going to be his weapon," he said, his voice low and fierce. "And I swear to you, I will not let him drag your brother back into this hell." He had arrived in this world lost and alone. Now, staring into the tear-filled eye of his only ally, he had found a new purpose. He would not just survive. He would protect. He would fight. He would defy a king, and if necessary, he would bring the entire Germa kingdom down around him to save a man he had never met. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Art of the Escape and the Brother's Shadow. Dawn was a promise of vivisection. The first, faint rays of light bled over the horizon, painting the churning sea in hues of gray and blood orange. Inside the gilded cage of the royal suite, the opulence felt like a funeral shroud. Time had run out. "The main docking bay is out," Reiju said, her voice a tense whisper. She pointed at a holographic schematic of the Germa kingdom projected between them. It was a complex, multi-layered beast of steel and circuitry. "After your performance, Father doubled the Haki-sensitive patrols there. They wouldn't see you, but they would feel you coming a mile away." Naruto's gaze was distant, his eyes unfocused. He wasn't just looking at the map. He was seeing the ghost-like paths of the guards moving across it, their futures laid bare. "He's expecting a direct assault. A breakout. He thinks I'll try to punch my way out." He shook his head, a slow, deliberate motion. "We're not going out," We're going down. His finger traced a path on the schematic. A route so insane, so counterintuitive, it made Reiju's breath catch. It led them through the ship's intestines. Ventilation shafts barely wide enough for a man, superheat. D-engine conduits that cycled on precise, predictable schedules, and finally, into the refuse disposal system. You want to get flushed out with the garbage? She asked, her voice laced with disbelief. No one expects the treasure to hide in the trash, Naruto countered, a grim certainty in his voice. Your father's pride is his biggest blind spot. He would never conceive of his perfect weapon, choosing such a dishonorable path. His haki hummed, confirming the logic. He could see the futures branching from this plan. They were fraught with peril, narrow and treacherous, but they were paths that led out. The paths from the main bay all led back to a laboratory table. As they finalized the timing, a voice, smooth and cold as polished steel, echoed from the room's hidden speakers. It was Ichiji. A touching scene. The stray and his keeper, plotting in the dark. Naruto and Reiju froze. The holographic map vanished. The voice was calm, almost conversational, but it was laced with a chilling, predatory amusement. Do you really think she's on your side, Anomaly? Ichiji's disembodied voice continued, a serpent whispering in the ear. Or is she just making the most logical move? Her position is weak. Her brothers have proven superior. Her father sees her as a flawed tool. What better way to regain his favor than to pretend to be your ally, learn the secrets of your power, and then deliver you to him? Gift wrapped and broken. Naruto's eyes met Reiju's. He could feel a spike of cold fear from her, the terror of her deepest insecurities being laid bare. She is a Vinsmoke, the voice cooed. We are survivors. We use the tools at our disposal. Her empathy is her weapon, and you, my dear specimen, are her target. She'll whisper promises, offer you comfort, maybe even a kiss, but in the end, her loyalty is to Germa. It's in her blood. She will betray you. It is her nature. The speaker clicked off, leaving a silence that was more poisonous than the words themselves. Ichiji hadn't sent guards. He hadn't triggered an alarm. He had launched a surgical strike against the one fragile thing they had, trust. Reiju wouldn't look at him. She stared at the floor, her hands clenched into fists, her entire body trembling. The words were a perfect poison, designed to confirm every doubt, every fear she had about her own monstrous nature. Naruto walked over to her. He didn't speak. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder. His haki wasn't seeing the future now, it was feeling the present. He could feel the chaotic storm of her self-loathing, the crushing weight of her brother's psychological warfare, and beneath it all, a fierce, defiant core of resolve. The same resolve that made her step in front of her brothers to protect him. He's wrong, Naruto said, his voice quiet but absolute. He had seen her memories. He had felt her pain. He knew the truth of her, a truth she herself was too afraid to accept. Let's go. His certainty was an anchor in her storm. She looked up, her visible eye filled with a desperate, fragile hope. She gave a single, sharp nod. The time for doubt was over. The time for running had begun. The ship's ventilation system was a labyrinth of cold, echoing metal. They moved in perfect, synchronized silence, a ghost and a shadow. Naruto went first, his body contorting to fit through the narrow ducts. His future sight was their only guide, a sixth sense that turned the impossible maze into a clear path. Hold, he'd whisper, and a second later, the heavy thud of a patrol passing beneath them would echo through the grate. Left turn. Now, he'd command, and they would pivot just as a rotating fan down the corridor whirred to life. Reiju followed, her movements lithe and silent. She was their key. At a junction, she would place a device on the wall, her fingers flying across its surface. A moment later, lights would flicker on a deck 3 levels above, a ghost signal in the machine that would draw a patrol away from their path. She was the saboteur, he was the seer. Together, they were a force that Germa's rigid, predictable security was utterly unprepared for. Their path eventually led them downwards, into the deafening, superheated heart of the kingdom, the engine rooms. A colossal space filled with pistons the size of houses, gears that ground with the force of tectonic plates, and a network of glowing orange conduits that pulsed with immense energy. The noise was a physical force, a constant, thunderous roar that vibrated in their teeth. It was the perfect cover. They leapt from a high gantry, landing silently on a maintenance platform. The exit to the disposal chutes was just across the chamber. Freedom was 100 yards of treacherous, moving machinery away. Going somewhere. A voice boomed, cutting through even the industrial din. A massive figure dropped from the scaffolding above, landing with a clang that shook the entire platform. Vinsmoke Reiju, his green raid suit gleaming in the pulsating light of the engine core, grinned a brutish, predatory grin. "Ichiji said you'd be sneaky," Reiju roared, cracking his knuckles. The sound was like granite slabs grinding together. "But I know how rats think. Always scuttling through the guts of the ship. No more dancing, freak. Here, it's just you and me. Nowhere to run." He wasn't here for strategy. He was here for a brawl. The confined space, the chaotic environment, it all favored his direct, overwhelming style. Reiju moved to stand beside Naruto, but he put out a hand to stop her. "Go," he said, his eyes not leaving Reiju. "Get to the control panel for the primary chute. You have 90 seconds. Naruto, you can't. Go," he commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. He could see the immediate future, a maelstrom of green-hued violence. He couldn't afford to be distracted by protecting her. Reiju laughed. "Listen to your girlfriend, freak. You can't beat me, not without your little dodging tricks." He charged, a green juggernaut of metal and muscle. The platform groaned under his weight. He wasn't as fast as Neji, but his power was immense, each punch carrying the force of a battering ram. Naruto didn't retreat. He met the charge, but he didn't block. He didn't strike back. He flowed. His future sight was a symphony in the chaos. He saw the arc of Reju's punch before the Vinsmoke's arm had even tensed. He ducked under the blow, the wind from it buffeting his hair, and as the massive fist smashed into the steel deck, Naruto's hand shot out. It wasn't a punch. It was a precise, targeted strike with the tips of his fingers. He jabbed the hydraulic joint at the back of Reju's knee. There was a hiss of depressurizing gas. Reiju stumbled, his legs suddenly refusing to support his immense weight. He roared in frustration and swung a backhand, aiming to pulp Naruto against a nearby piston. Naruto was already moving, flowing around him like water. His other hand chopped down, not on Reju's arm, but on the armored power conduit running along his elbow. Sparks flew. Reju's gauntlet, which had been glowing with green energy, flickered and died. "What are you doing?" Reiju bellowed, swinging wildly. His attacks becoming clumsy, predictable. Naruto was a ghost, an untouchable blur in the flashing engine lights. He was systematically dismantling his opponent. A precise jab to the actuator on his shoulder, disabling the pauldron. A targeted kick to a servo in his hip, throwing his balance into chaos. He wasn't fighting the man. He was fighting the machine. He was using his precone ITIVE sight to diagnose and disable every piece of Vinsmoke technology, turning Reju's greatest strength into a clanking, sparking prison. With a final, desperate roar, Reiju lunged, trying to grab Naruto in a crushing bear hug. Naruto simply dropped to one knee, letting the green giant stumble over him. As Reiju fell, Naruto drove the heel of his palm upwards into the back of his helmet, where a cluster of optical sensors fed into the display. The sensors shattered with a loud crackle. Reiju crashed to the floor, blind and immobile, his multi-billion berry raid suit sputtering and shorting out around him. He was completely helpless, tangled in the very technology that was meant to make him a Superman. Naruto stood over him, not even breathing hard. He hadn't broken a single bone. He hadn't drawn a single drop of blood. It was a victory of absolute, surgical precision. From across the chamber, he saw Reiju give him a signal. The chute was ready. He turned to leave, but Reju's voice, muffled and panicked from within his dead helmet, called out. "Wait, what are you? Why didn't you kill me?" Naruto paused at the edge of the platform. "Because that's what you wanted," he said, his ice cutting through the roar of the engines. "And I'm not like you." He leapt from the platform, leaving the Vinsmoke prince trapped in his own useless armor, a monument to a philosophy that power alone was not enough. They stood before a massive, circular hatch labeled, Waste Disposal Unit 3 feet. The air stank of ozone and refuse. This was the end of the line. "Freedom. It will lead directly to the sea," Reiju said, her hand on the control panel. "The current will take you away from the ship's sensors. She looked at him, her expression a painful mix of relief and sorrow. "We did it," Naruto said, a grin finally breaking through his tense expression. "Come on, let's get out of this rust bucket." Reiju shook her head, and the grin vanished from Naruto's face. "I can't," she whispered. "My place is here. If I run, Father will hunt us to the ends of the earth. The entire world government would be after us. You, alone, are an unknown anomaly. Me, a Vinsmoke princess, my desertion would be a declaration of war." She was right. His haki confirmed it, showing him flashes of a grim future on the run, relentlessly pursued. Her staying behind was the logical, strategic choice. It was a Vinsmoke choice. But the look in her eye was anything but logical. She pressed a small, golden compass and a scrap of white paper into his hand. "This is a log pose, calibrated for the Grand Line. It will point you to the last island we passed. From there, you can navigate. And this," she tapped the paper. "This is a piece of my brother's vivre card. It will guide you. It will pull you towards him." Her voice broke. "The restaurant is called the Bharati. It's in the East Blue. Find Sanji. Please. Protect the brother I failed." Before he could respond, she stepped forward, her hands coming up to cup his face. Her eyes, filled with an ocean of unshed tears, held his. "Ichiji was right about one thing," she whispered. "A Vinsmoke uses the tools they have." She leaned in and kissed him. It was not like the first one, the cold, clinical kiss in the medical bay. This was desperate, warm, and heartbreakingly final. It was a kiss of farewell, of gratitude, of profound, tragic affection. She pulled back, her forehead resting against his for a moment. "The first kiss," she said, her voice a ragged breath. "It was a poison, subtle, odorless. My father's final failsafe. It bypasses even your healing factor. In another day or two, your heart would have simply stopped." Naruto's blood ran cold. "I am poison pink, after all," she whispered, a sad, self-loathing smile gracing her lips. This kiss was the antidote. In that single, devastating confession, she answered Ichiji's taunts. She had proven her loyalty. She had saved his life at the cost of her own freedom, choosing him over her father, over her family, over her own survival. A klaxon blared through the chamber, loud and insistent. Red lights flashed, bathing them in a bloody glow. They were out of time. "Go," she cried, shoving I.M. toward the hatch as she slammed her hand down on the activation panel. The massive hatch began to retract with a groan of metal. Naruto looked back at her, a torrent of words, of protests, of thanks, dying on his lips. He saw her framed in the flashing red lights, a solitary, tragic figure who had just sacrificed everything for him. He gave her one last, profound look, a promise. Then he turned, and leapt into the darkness of the chute. The roar of the engines was replaced by the roar of rushing water. He was flushed out into the cold, dark, unforgiving sea, the log pose and the vivre card clutched in his hand like a sacred trust. He surfaced, gasping, miles away from the colossal, receding form of the Germa kingdom. He was alone, he was free, and he had a debt to repay. He looked at the scrap of paper, already feeling its faint, insistent pull. East Blue, Bharati, Sanji. He had escaped the cage, but Reiju now bore the weight of its lock and key. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Uncharted Sea and the Weight of a Promise. The sea was a merciless god. For 3 days, Naruto had been its supplicant, offering his dwindling strength in exchange for another breath, another hour. The Rekka, he clung to, a splintered piece of Germa decking, was his only prayer. The sun beat down, blistering his skin, and the salt water stung the cuts and scrapes he'd earned in his escape. His chakra, a familiar inferno, was a guttering candle, conserved for the most vital of tasks, healing the worst of the sun's bite, purging the salt from the water he drank, and holding his weary body together. His new sense, his haki, was his only true guide in the endless blue. It was the whisper that warned him of a rogue wave cresting behind him, giving him a precious second to brace himself. It was the faint hum of life that guided him toward a school of fish, allowing him to snatch one from the water for a raw, desperate meal. It was a constant, low thrum, a connection to the world that kept the madness of solitude at bay. But more than a tool for survival, it was a conduit for memory. In the quiet, lonely hours, with nothing but the sigh of the wind and the slap of water against his makeshift raft, his mind would drift. He would see her, Reiju, standing in the flashing red lights of the disposal bay, her expression a shattering mosaic of sacrifice and sorrow. He would feel the ghost of her kiss, not the first, cold one of poison, but the second, desperate one of farewell. The antidote. She had saved him twice over, once from her father's scalpel and once from her own unwitting hand. He clutched the two items she had given him. The golden log pose, its needle quivering, pointing steadfastly toward a future he couldn't see. And the scrap of paper, the vivre card. It was more than a map. It pulsed with a faint, insistent warmth, a homing beacon of life force. It was a tangible piece of her brother's soul, and a physical representation of her hope. A hope she had placed squarely on Naruto's shoulders. Find Sanji. Protect the brother I failed. The words echoed in his mind, a vow forged in her sacrifice. This was no longer just about his own survival. It was a mission, a debt that could only be repaid by fulfilling the promise he had made to her in his heart. He would find this lost prince, this chef with dreams of the sea. And he would protect him from the gilded cage that sought to reclaim him. On the fourth day, his haki screamed a new song. Not the gentle hum of fish or the chaotic roar of a coming storm, but a steady, rhythmic pulse. Land. It was a faint, distant feeling, but it was unmistakable. He kicked his legs, paddling with a piece of debris, his movements clumsy but driven by a surge of desperate energy. For hours he paddled, the feeling growing stronger, until finally, he saw it. A dark line on the horizon. An island. Port Scrimshaw was less a town and more a collection of buildings clinging stubbornly to a rocky coastline, like barnacles to a ship's hull. The air smelled of salt, tar, and the savory aroma of fried fish. Weather-beaten docks groaned under the weight of a few fishing vessels and a single, ugly-looking merchant ship. The people were as weathered as their homes. Their faces etched with the lines of hard work and a quiet, persistent worry that Naruto's haki could feel like a low-grade fever infecting the entire port. He stumbled onto the docks, his legs unsteady after days at sea. He was a strange sight. A young man in scorched black clothing, with sun-bleached blonde hair and eyes that seemed too old, too intense for his face. He drew stares, but no one approached him. There was a wariness here, a sense that attracting attention was a dangerous proposition. He had no money, no connections, no knowledge of this new world beyond. The datapad he'd been forced to leave behind. But he had a skill. He found the busiest part of the port, a small shipyard where a grizzled old man with arms like knotted ropes was struggling to hoist a new mast onto a small fishing boat. Need a hand? Naruto asked, his voice rough from disuse. The old shipwright, whose name was Zephyrin, squinted at him. You look like you wrestled a sea king and lost, boy. What do you want? Work, Naruto said simply. I need a boat. Doesn't have to be big, just seaworthy. I'll work for it. Zephyrin studied him for a long moment, his gaze sharp and appraising. He saw the exhaustion, but he also saw the unyielding steel in the boy's spine. He grunted. Fine, you can work, but I can't pay you much. Times are hard. The word, hard, was an understatement. As Naruto worked, lifting heavy timbers and patching hulls with a strength that surprised the old man, he listened. He learned that Port Scrimshaw was under the thumb of a pirate crew. Their captain, a man known as Grackle, Iron Blight, had a fearsome reputation and a strange, terrifying power. He could turn any metal he touched to rust in an instant. Swords, cannons, anchors, all crumbled to red dust at his command. Once a week, Grackle's ship, the Corrosion, would dock, and his crew would swagger through the town, taking what they wanted. Food, supplies, and a hefty protection tax from every business owner. To resist was to invite ruin. The few guards the town had were useless, their swords and spears turning to powder before they could even be swung. They were a people disarmed and demoralized, trapped in a slow, suffocating bleed. Naruto felt a familiar, simmering anger. It was the same feeling he'd had watching Gaara suffer, seeing the downtrodden villagers of the land of waves oppressed by Gato. Tyrants were tyrants, whether they were corporate thugs or swaggering pirates. His mission was to find Sanji, but his haki was screaming at him, showing him the branching futures of this town. In one, he ignored the problem, stole a small boat under the cover of darkness, and left. The town's fever of fear would fester, eventually breaking as Grackle's demands escalated, ending in fire and bloodshed. In the other path, the future was a chaotic, violent storm, but beyond it, he could sense a glimmer of something else. Peace, defiance, hope. His choice was never really a choice. He was Naruto Uzumaki. He didn't turn his back on people who needed help. The corrosion arrived as predicted, a brutish, ugly vessel caked in rust, a testament to its captain's power. Grackle was a large, greasy man with a beard caked with old food and a cruel smirk. He swaggered onto the docks, his men fanning out behind him, their laughter loud and grating in the tense silence of the port. Naruto was mending a net with Zephyrin when Grackle and two of his cronies stopped in front of the shipyard. "Zephyrin, you old goat," Grackle boomed, his voice like gravel. "Tax time. You know the drill. Or is that new mast you're fitting too heavy for your coin purse?" Zephyrин's face hardened, but he reached into his pocket, his hand trembling slightly with repressed rage. "It's been a slow week, Grackle. Excuses are like barnacles, old man," Grackle sneered. "Ugly and worthless." He gestured, and one of his men kicked over a stack of carefully prepared lumber. "Pay up, or I'll see how well new boat floats after I've given its nails a little tap." That was it. The line had been crossed. "That's enough." The voice was calm, quiet, but it cut through the tension like a kunai. Everyone turned. Naruto stood up, letting the net fall from his hands. He walked forward, positioning himself between the pirates and the old shipwright. Grackle's eyes narrowed, taking in the blonde-haired stranger. Well, what's this? A new stray? You got a death wish, boy." Naruto's haki was humming. He could feel the lazy, arrogant confidence of the pirate captain, the simple, thuggish intent of his men. He saw their moves before they made them. The one on the left will draw his cutlass. The one on the right will lunge with a dagger. "Leave him alone," Naruto said, his voice flat. "Take your ship and get out of this town." The pirates roared with laughter. "You hear that, Captain? The pup is barking orders." As his haki had predicted, the pirate on the left drew his sword, a rusty, jagged thing. The other lunged, a dagger held in a low grip. They were fast, but to Naruto, they were moving through water. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He took one step forward, flowing between the two attackers. His right hand shot out, striking the swordsman's wrist with his knuckles, sending the cutlass flying. His left hand caught the other pirate's dagger-wielding arm, using the man's own momentum to twist him around and send him crashing into his companion. The two pirates went down in a heap of tangled limbs and curses. It was over in less than a second. The laughter died. The entire dock went silent. Grackle's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of surprised fury. "So the pup has teeth," he growled. "No matter. Let's see how you bite without any fangs." He lunged forward, his hand outstretched, aiming not for Naruto, but for a nearby stack of brand new, gleaming anchors. The moment his fingers touched the metal, a wave of brown-red decay spread through the anchors like a disease. In a single, horrifying second, the solid steel dissolved into a pile of red dust that puffed away on the sea breeze. The townspeople gasped in terror. This was the power that had held them captive. A power that made weapons, armor, and courage meaningless. Naruto watched, his expression unreadable. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a kunai, a keepsake from a world away. He held it up. Grackle grinned, a truly malevolent expression. "A little knife. Are you going to tickle me with that?" He lumbered forward. Naruto tossed the kunai. It flew through the air, a perfect, spinning arc aimed at Grackle's chest. The pirate captain didn't even bother to dodge. He simply stuck out his hand. The kunai touched his palm, and in midair, it disintegrated. The blade and handle turned to rust and powder, vanishing before it could even draw blood. "See," Grackle laughed, taking another step. "Useless. Everything you have is useless. Now, I'm going to break every bone in your body for that little display." He reached for Naruto, his grimy fingers spread wide, ready to inflict his corrosive touch. The crowd held its collective breath. Naruto stood his ground. He didn't retreat. He didn't even seem to tense. He just watched the hand come closer. And in his mind, he saw it all. The exact path of the hand. The slight curl of the fingers. The way Grackle put his weight on his left foot to get more reach. At the last possible second, Naruto moved. He ducked under the outstretched arm, his body a blur. He wasn't just fast. His movement was preternaturally perfect. As he came up behind the off-balance pirate, his right hand began to glow with a swirling, incandescent blue light. A high-pitched, whirring sound filled the air, like 1,000 angry hornets. Grackle's eyes went wide with shock and confusion. He tried to turn, but he was too slow, too clumsy. Naruto thrust his hand forward. Rasengan, the spinning sphere of pure chakra, an attack with no metal to rust, no weapon to decay. Slammed into the center of Grackle's back. The impact wasn't a cut or a stab. It was a concussive, grinding explosion of power. The pirate captain was launched from his feet as if fired from a cannon. He flew across the docks, his body spinning like a top, and crashed through the wall of a fish warehouse with a sound like a thunderclap. He didn't get up. The silence that followed was absolute. The remaining pirates stared, their jaws agape, at the smoking, man-sized hole in the warehouse wall, then at the blonde stranger who stood with his hand still steaming slightly, not a scratch on him. Then, one of them dropped his sword and ran. The others followed, scrambling over each other in a panicked, desperate flight back to their ship. In less than a minute, the corrosion was pulling away from the dock. Its crew not even bothering to raise the sails properly, their only thought to escape the monster who had just defeated their untouchable captain. Naruto stood on the dock, the blue light fading from his hand. He had revealed a part of himself, a power that was utterly alien to this world. As the adrenaline of the fight faded, a familiar, chilling sensation washed over him. A wave of vertigo. The world flickered at the edges of his vision. He was back in the cold, star-dusted void. The immense, cosmic chart lay beneath him. This time, the white-gloved hand was not just observing. It clenched, slowly, into a fist. The voice echoed, not with surprise, but with a cold, analytical finality. The anomaly exhibits abilities beyond the predicted parameters. Its signature is disruptive. It is no longer a stray spark. It is a contagion. Reclassification approved. Prepare an eradication protocol. The remnant will not tolerate uncontrolled variables. The vision snapped, throwing him back to the sun-drenched docks of Port Scrimshaw. He stumbled, catching himself on a post, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow. The pressure of that gaze, that intent, was 1,000 times more terrifying than Grackle's power. His actions had consequences on a scale he couldn't begin to imagine. He had freed a town, but he had just signed his own death warrant from a power that existed between the stars. Zephyrin and the other townspeople rushed toward him, their faces filled with awe and gratitude. The old shipwright clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder. You saved us, boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Naruto looked at the faces of the people he had just saved, at the hope that was beginning to replace the fear in their eyes. He had made a ripple, and the thing in the void had noticed. 2 days later, Naruto stood at the helm of a small, sturdy caravel, a gift from the grateful people of Port Scrimshaw. The boat was stocked with fresh water, food, and a new set of clothes. He was no longer a castaway. He was a traveler, a man on a mission. He looked at the log pose strapped to his wrist, its needle pointing west. He held the Vivre card in his hand, feeling its gentle, insistent pull toward the east blue. His course was set. He had defied a king. He had defeated a pirate. He had freed a town. And in doing so, he had drawn the attention of a god. Like enemy from beyond the veil of his reality. The weight of his promise to Reiju felt heavier than ever, but for the first time since arriving in this world, he felt the wind at his back and a solid deck beneath his feet. He was moving forward, and whatever came for him, from the sea or from the stars, he would be ready. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The weight of the world sea and a hunter from the void. The sea became Naruto's world. He named his small caravel the Gratitude, a silent nod to the people of Port Scrimshaw. But Gratitude was a poor captain. The Grand Line was a beast of 1,000 moods. And Naruto had to learn its language on the fly. He became a one-man crew, a frantic, chaotic symphony of orange and blue against the endless expanse of the ocean. A dozen shadow clones swarmed the deck at any given time. One trio hauled on the mainsail to catch the fickle winds, their movements clumsy but effective. Another group perpetually baled water that splashed over the gunnels. A pair sat in the crow's nest, their combined gazes scanning the horizon. The original Naruto stood at the helm, his hands gripping the wheel, his haki a net cast across the waves. This new sense was his true compass. It was the whisper that warned him of a treacherous current long before the water's surface showed any sign of it. It was the premonition of a sudden squall, giving his clones just enough time to batten the hatches. He learned to read the future of the waves, the intent of the wind. He was not just sailing. He was in a constant, flowing dialogue with the sea itself. In the quiet moments, when the sea was calm and the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue, the loneliness would creep in. It was a cold, heavy thing, a stark contrast to the boisterous, crowded life he had always known. Konoha, with its familiar faces and noisy streets, felt like a half-remembered dream. He found himself talking to Kurama, a one-sided conversation with the slumbering titan in his soul. "It's big, you know," he murmured to the empty air. His eyes on the horizon. "This ocean, I think you'd like it. Plenty of room to stretch your tails." There was no response, only the gentle, steady thrum of the fox's immense, healing life force. It was a comfort, a reminder that he wasn't truly, completely alone. He would pull out the vivre card, the scrap of paper that felt like a living thing in his palm. It tugged, a gentle but insistent promise. Toward the east blue, toward Sanji. "Protect the brother I failed." Reiju's voice was a constant echo, the fuel that kept him going when exhaustion threatened to pull him under. He wasn't just sailing for himself. He was sailing for her. On the 10th day, the dialogue with the sea turned into a screaming match. The sky, which had been clear moments before, turned a bruised, sickly purple. The wind died, and the air grew heavy, thick with an unnatural, oppressive silence. Naruto's haki, which had been a flowing river, became a raging, chaotic torrent of warning signals. This was no ordinary storm. This was one of the Grand Line's legendary temper tantrums. The sea rose to meet the sky. Waves, not of water, but of liquid mountains, clawed at the heavens. The gratitude was thrown about like a child's toy, its timbers groaning in protest. Naruto's clones fought with desperate, frantic energy, their shouts swallowed by the apocalyptic roar of the wind. A whirlpool, a spinning maw of turquoise fury large enough to swallow a warship, opened directly in their path. There was no steering around it. It was a liquid drain at the end of the world. "Hold on," Naruto roared, more to himself than to his evaporating clones. He abandoned the helm, his feet finding purchase on the slick, heaving deck. He saw the future, a terrifyingly clear vision of the ship being sucked into the vortex. Splintering into 1,000 pieces, dragging him down into the crushing, dark depths. That was a future he refused to accept. He gathered his chakra, pulling on the deep, refilling well within him. The power swirled in his palm, a familiar, comforting hum amidst the chaos. It grew, expanding into a sphere of violent, rotating energy larger than any he had ever created on his own. It was a churning, blue sun, raw and untamed. Giant Rasengan, with a deafening roar that challenged the storm itself, he slammed the massive sphere of chakra knot into the whirlpool, oot into the crest of the colossal wave that was about to push them into it. The impact was cataclysmic. The Rasengan didn't just disperse the wave, it detonated it. A massive, concussive blast of wind and water erupted outwards. A man-made typhoon fighting a natural one. The resulting shockwave was immense. It acted like a countercurrent, a violent shove that pushed the battered gratitude away from the whirlpool's edge. The ship screamed as it was thrown sideways, its main mast cracking with a sound like a rifle shot. Naruto was sent tumbling across the deck, his vision swimming, the expended ewer of so much chakra leaving him dizzy and nauseous. But they were free. They had skirted the drain. The storm, as if its fury had been spent in that one, climactic moment, began to recede, the purple sky slowly lightening to a bruised gray. Naruto lay on the deck, his chest heaving, his clones all gone. The ship was a wreck. The mast was splintered, the sails were in tatters, and there was a gaping hole in the port side. But it was still floating. He had won. He pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. He had to make repairs. He had to survive. As he took his first, weary step, his haki, his ever-present sixth sense, went absolutely, terrifyingly silent. It wasn't a lack of input. It was a void, a perfect, chilling sphere of nothing that was rapidly approaching from the west. It was like a patch of the world had been erased, and that erasure was moving towards him. He had never felt anything like it. It wasn't the arrogant ambition of Judge or the brutish rage of his sons. It was the cold, unfeeling emptiness of a vacuum. His head snapped up. Against the gray, stormy sky, he saw her. She wasn't flying. She was simply there. A figure, impossibly still in the turbulent air, descending toward his crippled ship. She was a woman, tall and unnervingly slender, clad in a stark white, form-fitting suit adorned with strange, silver, geometric patterns. Her hair was the color of moonlight, cut in a severe, perfect bob. Her face was beautiful, but it was the beauty of a marble statue, emotionless, flawless, and utterly cold. She had no aura, no presence. She was a hole in the fabric of reality. This was the hunter, the eradication protocol. She landed on the deck of his ship, her feet making no sound on the splintered wood. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, fixed on him. They held no malice, no anger, no curiosity. It was the gaze of a surgeon observing a bacterium before sterilization. Anomaly designation. Uzumaki Naruto, she said. Her voice was a perfect, synthesized monotone, devoid of inflection. You have been classified as a contagion level variable. By order of the celestial remnant, your existence is to be nullified. Naruto's body was screaming with exhaustion, his chakra reserves scraping bottom. But every instinct, honed by a lifetime of war, was blaring. His haki, which couldn't feel her, was screaming at him about the consequences of her actions. He saw a flash of the future so horrifying it stole his breath, the spot where he stood, simply, gone. Not destroyed, erased. He didn't wait for her to finish. He threw himself to the side in a desperate, rolling dive. The spot where he had been standing vanished. There was no explosion, no sound, no flash of light. The deck planking, a section of the railing, and even the air itself were simply gone, replaced by a perfect, shimmering sphere of non-existence about a meter in diameter. It hung there for a second before winking out, leaving behind a hole with edges so clean they looked like they'd been cut by a laser. Naruto scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. That wasn't a devil fruit. That wasn't haki. That was something else. A power that didn't destroy matter, but unmade it. Resistance is an illogical variable, the woman, the thing, stated. She raised a hand, her palm open. Another shimmering sphere of nothingness began to form. He couldn't fight her. He knew it with an absolute certainty that transcended strategy. To fight her was to be erased. He saw the future again. Any attack he launched, a Rasengan, a chakra-infused punch, would be swallowed by that void, ceasing to exist before it ever made contact. This wasn't a battle. This was an extermination. So he did the one thing she wouldn't expect. He ran. He poured the last of his usable chakra into his legs and darted across the deck, not away from her, but towards her. Her head tilted, a minute, robotic gesture of analysis. Her attack was aimed at his center of mass. His sudden, illogical charge was a deviation. He formed a single shadow clone without breaking stride. The clone veered left while the real Naruto veered right. It was a simple, academy-level feint, but against an enemy who operated on pure, cold logic. It was enough to create a microsecond of targeting conflict. That microsecond was all he needed. He didn't try to attack her. He ran past her, his shoulder nearly brushing her cold, still form. He leapt onto the broken railing of his sinking ship and, without hesitation, dove into the churning, gray sea. The clone, its purpose served, charged directly at the hunter. The sphere of null energy left her hand, and the clone vanished, not in a puff of smoke, but into absolute nothingness. The hunter, whom the remnant called Locus, stood on the deck of the sinking ship. She lowered her hand, her mission parameters having been met. The anomaly had been nullified. She turned her gaze to the sea, her silver eyes scanning the waves. No life signature, no energy reading, nothing. Target eliminated, she reported to the empty sky. Commencing extraction. She rose into the air, as silent and effortless as she had arrived, and vanished into the gray clouds, leaving the broken, empty gratitude to be swallowed by the sea. Miles away, Naruto surfaced, gasping for air, his body screaming in protest. He had used a transformation jutsu combined with his last regs of chakra to make himself look and feel like a piece of floating driftwood. A desperate, life-or-death gamble that had paid off. He had fooled her sensors, her logic. He had survived. He was alone, treading water in the middle of the Grand Line, his ship gone, his body pushed to its absolute limit. He was back where he started. No, he was worse off than before. He was exhausted, injured, and now he had a name for the enemy that hunted him from beyond the stars. The Celestial Remnant, and they had sent an angel of death to erase him. He was adrift, lost, and hunted by a cosmic horror. The weight of the world sea was nothing compared to the weight of that truth. It was enough to make any man give up, to let the waves take him. But as he bobbed in the water, a faint, familiar warmth pulsed against his chest. Inside the pouch he had guarded with his life. The vivre card. It was still intact. It was still pulling. A steady, stubborn thread of life in a world that wanted him gone. He looked in the direction of the pull. Toward the distant, unseen east blue. A grim, bloody smile stretched across his face. He had faced down a god of his world. He had escaped a kingdom of super soldiers. He had just survived an assassin from the void. They thought he was a contagion. They thought he was an anomaly to be erased. They had no idea who they were dealing with. He was Naruto Uzumaki. And he never, ever gave up. With a deep breath, he began to swim. Chapter 8 End.